A plastic name badge, Susan, gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights of the departure gate. "Sir," she said, her voice dripping with a sickly, forced patience, "if you cannot control your family, I will have you removed from the airport." Dr. Airline Wilson squeezed her husband's arm, her nails digging into his blazer. "We are in control," David Wilson replied, his voice a low, steady baritone. "We are simply asking why our paid-for business-class seats are now unavailable." Susan Jenkins smiled, a thin, sharp expression. "I don't know what to tell you. The system says no. Now step aside." But she didn't see the iPhone, held low by their teenage daughter, its small red light blinking. The moment was being captured, and their lives were about to change forever. The chaos of Los Angeles International Airport's Tom Bradley Terminal was a familiar symphony to the Wilson family. It was 7:10 p.m., and Flight 88 on Transatlantic Airways to London Heathrow was already flashing, preparing for boarding. The Wilsons were not casual tourists. They were a portrait of composed success. David Wilson was a leading cardiovascular surgeon, scheduled to deliver the keynote address at the World Health Innovators Conference in London. His wife, Dr. Airline Wilson, was a tenured professor of cultural anthropology at UCLA, presenting her own research. Their daughter, 16-year-old Maya, was sharp and observant, her head already full of the London museums she planned to conquer. And then there was Leo, 8 years old, brilliant, and diagnosed with a sensory processing disorder. For Leo, travel was a trial by fire, a barrage of overwhelming sounds and stimuli. They traveled well prepared. They had paid a significant sum for 4 business-class seats, rows 2A, 2B, 2D, and 2E, to give Leo the space and quiet he needed to manage the 10-hour flight. In Alani's carry-on was a folder, thick with documentation, receipts, confirmations, and a letter from Leo's developmental pediatrician, all submitted and pre-approved by the airline's disability services. They approached the priority boarding lane, their luggage gliding silently behind them. The gate area was a sea of tired faces. At the podium stood 2 agents. One, a young man, was placidly stamping passports. The other, the supervisor, was a woman in her late 40s named Susan Jenkins. She had a tight blonde ponytail and an aura of frantic, brittle authority. She was typing furiously, her lips pursed, as if the computer itself had personally offended her. "Good evening," David said, placing their 4 passports on the counter. Susan did not look up. "Passports," she snapped. David slid them closer. She snatched them, one by one, scanning them with aggressive thwacks of the machine. Beep, beep, beep. Then, the 4th passport, Leo's. Beep, beep, beep. A harsh digital error. Susan sighed, a theatrical performance of exasperation. "Of course," she muttered. She typed, the clack, clack, clack of her nails echoing. "Sir, your party is only confirmed for 3. David's smile remained, but it tightened. "I'm sorry. There must be a mistake. We purchased 4 tickets. Here is the confirmation." He slid his phone across the counter, showing the email. Susan barely glanced at it. "The system says 3. I have 1, Mr. David Wilson, 1 Dr. Airline Wilson, and 1 Miss Maya Wilson. I don't have a Leo Wilson in business class." Airline stepped forward, her voice calm and clear. "That's not possible. We booked them together. He is my son. He is on my lap in the passport photo. We are a family of 4. "Mom," Susan said, finally looking up, her eyes scanning them from head to toe. Her gaze lingered on David's tailored but casual blazer, Alani's stylish braids, and Maya's expensive headphones. It was a look of instant, sour calculation. "Lots of people try to book tickets. Sometimes they don't go through. The system says your son's ticket is waitlisted for economy." Waitlisted? David's professional demeanor was being tested. Ma'am, I have the receipt. My credit card was charged $24,750 for these 4 seats. Please check again. Susan's eyes narrowed. The mention of the price seemed to anger her. Sir, I don't care what your email says. I care what my system says. I have 3 seats for you. I might be able to get your son a middle seat in economy. Row 38. Leo, sensing the rising tension, began to vibrate, his small hands twisting the hem of his shirt. Mommy? I want my seat. I want 2E. It's the window. I know, baby, Alani soothed, rubbing his back. She turned back to Susan, her voice losing its warmth. This is unacceptable. We have a medical pre-approval for our son. He needs to be seated with us. We paid for it. Medical? Susan scoffed, a tiny, ugly sound. Everyone has a medical issue these days when they want an upgrade. That was the first crack. The mask of customer service fell away, revealing the raw prejudice beneath. She hadn't heard, he needs to be with us. She'd heard, upgrade. She saw a black family in expensive clothes and assumed fraud. We are not asking for an upgrade, David said, his voice dropping an octave. We are asking for the seats we purchased. Here is the confirmation number. Here are the ticket numbers. Please call a manager. Susan's name badge read Gate Supervisor. She tapped it with a long acrylic nail. I am the manager, and I'm telling you, you are holding up my boarding process. She then turned to the family behind them, a white couple in their 60s. Go ahead, folks. So sorry for the delay. She began processing their tickets, deliberately ignoring the Wilsons, leaving them standing, humiliated, in the middle of the priority lane. Mum, Maya whispered, her voice trembling with fury. She's doing this on purpose. David put a hand on his daughter's shoulder. Breathe, Maya. We don't make a scene. We just get the facts. He waited. When the other couple had passed, he spoke again. Ms. Jenkins, you have our passports. You have our confirmation. You are refusing to board us. What is the solution? Susan finished her typing and looked at him, her eyes as cold and flat as the terminal floor. The solution is, you can accept the 3 seats I have, and your son can go to 38E, or you can all forfeit your flight. Your choice. You have 2 minutes to decide before I release your seats to the standby list. She turned away, dismissing them completely. Alani looked at David, her eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and fury. Leo was now humming, a high-pitched, anxious sound that was his last defense before a full-blown meltdown. Okay, David said, pulling his family to the side, out of the flow of other passengers. Okay, this is what we're going to do. He looked at Maya. Pull out your phone. Don't make it obvious. Just start recording the audio. Put it in your pocket. Mic up. Maya nodded, her fingers flying across the screen. Recording. Alani, get the full document folder ready. David, go back. We are going to create a verbal record. We will not be moved. Alani nodded, her professor mode activating. She was no longer just a mother. She was a researcher, and this was an experiment in raw, undisguised bias. David stepped back to the counter. Susan was busy, her back to him. He waited. Excuse me, he said, loud enough for the phone to pick up. Susan Jenkins, we are formally stating that we are not accepting your offer. We have 4 paid-for, confirmed tickets in business class. You have refused to honor them, and you have refused to call another manager. Is that correct? Susan spun around, her face crimson. Who do you think you are? I'm not going to be interrogated by you. I'm calling security. You're being disruptive. We are not being disruptive, Alani said, stepping up beside her husband. We are being denied boarding. You have suggested separating our minor child, who has a documented medical need, from us on an international flight, despite us having a paid-for seat for him. That's it. Susan picked up the gate phone. I need security at gate 112. I have a family refusing to follow instructions. Belligerent passengers. David and Alani just stood there, rooted to the spot. They looked at each other. This was it. The line had been crossed. Let her, David said, his voice calm but his heart hammering. Let her call. Let them all come. Maya, standing 10 feet back, adjusted the phone in her pocket, her thumb brushing the screen, making sure that little red light was still on. The wait for security was both agonizingly long and terrifyingly short. The boarding announcements for Flight 88 continued, the automated voice blissfully unaware of the human drama unfolding at the podium. We are now inviting passengers in Zones 3 and 4 to board. The Wilsons, holding business class tickets, were still stuck on the carpet, treated like criminals. Leo was now sitting on their carry-on, his hands over his ears, rocking slightly. Alani crouched beside him, murmuring, "It's okay, Leo Bug. We're just waiting for some helpers. We're going to get on the plane. You'll get to see Big Ben." 2 LAX airport police officers arrived. One was a broad, older man, Officer Mike, his face weathered and tired. The other was younger, Officer Ramirez, alert and wary. "What's the problem here, Susan?" Officer Mike asked, his voice a low rumble. He clearly knew her. "Thank God," Susan said, rushing forward. "This family," she gestured, "is refusing to accept their seat assignments. I've told them their tickets aren't valid, and they're blocking the gate, being belligerent. They're demanding an upgrade they didn't pay for." The lie was so blatant, so audacious, that Alani almost gasped. David stepped forward, his hands open and visible. "Officer, my name is David Wilson. This is my wife, Dr. Alani Wilson, and our children. We are not being belligerent. We are trying to board. We have 4 paid-for business-class tickets." He didn't offer his phone. He offered his passport and the printed-out e-ticket receipts from Alani's folder. "Ms. Jenkins is claiming our 8-year-old son's ticket isn't valid. She offered to put him in economy, alone. We have the receipt showing all 4 tickets were purchased on the same itinerary. We also have medical pre-clearance for him." Officer Mike took the papers. He was a cop, not a ticket agent, but he knew how to read documentation. He looked at the receipt. He looked at the passport. He looked at the confirmation. He then looked at Susan. "Susan, it says, confirmed, right here. 4 passengers, seats 2A, 2B, 2D, 2E. Susan's face twisted. She snatched the paper from his hand. "That's an email. It's not the system. The system is what matters. It's probably a fake email." "A fake email," David repeated, his voice dangerously quiet. "Ma'am, that is a confirmation from Transatlantic's own servers. Are you accusing me of fraud?" "I'm just saying, the system doesn't lie," Susan hissed. "The hell it doesn't," Officer Mike muttered, loud enough for them all to hear. He looked at his partner. "This is a civil matter. It's not a security threat." He turned back to Susan. "They're not being belligerent, Susan. They're a family with a ticket problem. You need to solve it. Call your operations manager." Susan looked horrified, not at her mistake, but at the officer for not blindly taking her side. "I can't just call operations for every dispute." "Then do your job," Officer Mike said, his patience gone. "Look again. Type in the ticket number, not the confirmation code. Try the PNR." Grumbling, and with the officers now watching her every move, Susan turned back to her terminal. She typed with furious, stabbing motions. The Wilsons watched. Maya's phone was still recording, capturing Susan's muttering. "Stupid. Think they own the place. Probably on some buddy pass." Suddenly the typing stopped. Susan's body went rigid. She didn't say anything. "Well?" Officer Mike asked. Susan cleared her throat. Her entire demeanor shifted. It was a masterpiece of cognitive dissonance. A sickly sweet smile bloomed on her face. "Oh my goodness," she chirped, her voice suddenly an octave higher. "What a silly mistake. It seems the system hadn't properly synced with the manifest. I am so sorry for the confusion." She slid the passports and 4 new, freshly printed boarding passes onto the counter. "Here you are. Seats 2A, 2B, 2D, and 2E. Have a wonderful flight to London." She beamed at them as if they were old friends, as if the last 15 minutes of accusations and threats of security had never happened. David and Alani were momentarily stunned into silence. It was that fast. The problem that required security and threatened to ruin their trip had evaporated the instant a white man in a uniform told her to do her job properly. David stared at her. He didn't take the boarding passes. "So, to be clear," he said, his voice loud enough for the officers and the other passengers to hear, "we were not trying to scam an upgrade. We were not belligerent, and these tickets are valid?" Susan's smile twitched. The color was rising in her neck. "It was a simple computer error, sir. I do apologize. You'll need to board now. You're one of the last." Officer Mike nodded at David, a small sign of respect, and touched the brim of his cap. "Have a safe flight, folks." He and his partner turned and walked away. David finally picked up the boarding passes. He looked at Susan Jenkins, his eyes holding hers. He didn't say, "Thank you." He didn't say anything. He just gathered his family. "Come on, Leo Bug," Alani said, her voice shaking slightly with residual adrenaline. "Time to go." Maya finally hit stop on her phone, saving the 17-minute audio file. She looked at Susan Jenkins as they walked past. Susan refused to meet her gaze, already busy with the next task, her face a mask of false pleasantry. As they walked down the long jet bridge, the air stale and quiet, David leaned over to Alani. She knew. The moment she looked at us, she decided we were liars. "I know," Alani said, squeezing his hand. "But we're on. We're together. That's what matters." They stepped onto the aircraft, the bright lights and smiling faces of the cabin crew a welcome relief. Or so they thought. The first person they saw was a male flight attendant, standing by the galley. He was tall, with perfectly coiffed blonde hair and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. His name tag read, Chad. "Welcome aboard," he said, his tone flat. He glanced at their boarding passes. "Business class. Straight ahead to your left." As they passed, his eyes followed them. He picked up the intercom phone. "Susan, it's Chad. Yeah, they're on. The whole family." He listened for a moment, then smirked. "Oh, I will. Don't you worry, I'll be watching." He hung up. The Wilsons, still settling into their seats, hadn't heard the exchange. They were busy with Leo, who was now overwhelmed by the new environment. The confrontation at the gate was over, but the ordeal, they would soon learn, had only just begun. The transatlantic business class cabin was an oasis of calm, all muted greys and soft blue lighting. The Wilsons settled into their pod-like seats, the relief palpable. David and Alani were in the 2 center seats, 2D and 2E, allowing them to lower the partition. Maya took the window at 2A, and Leo took the window at 2B, right across the aisle from his parents. Alani immediately went into her well-practiced routine. She got Leo's noise-cancelling headphones on, queued up his favorite movie on the setback screen, and pulled out his most important tool, his blanket. It wasn't a simple blanket. It was a $300 custom-made therapeutic weighted blanket, queen-sized dark grey and filled with non-toxic glass beads. It weighed 15 pounds. The deep pressure was the only thing that could ground Leo during the sensory overload of takeoff and turbulence. It was, quite literally, his medical device. And, per the instructions in Alani's folder, it had been pre-cleared by the airline. The letter from Transatlantic's Disability Services stipulated it was to be used during flight, including takeoff and landing, as a medical comfort item, superseding standard blanket stowage rules. Alani draped it over Leo. The boy's vibrating legs instantly stilled. He let out a long sigh, his small body sinking into the plush seat. He was safe. Alani finally sat down, closing her eyes for just a second. "Okay," she whispered to David. "We made it." "Excuse me." The voice was sharp, cutting through the cabin's low hum. It was Chad, the flight attendant. He was standing in the aisle, arms crossed, looking down at Leo. "Ma'am, you're going to have to stow that," he said, pointing at the blanket. "It's far too large. It needs to go in the overhead bin for takeoff." Alani's eyes snapped open. "Oh," she said, pulling out her calm voice. "Thank you, but this is a therapeutic item for our son. It's a weighted blanket for his anxiety. We have it medically pre-cleared by the airline." She reached for her folder. "I have the letter right here." Chad put up a hand. "I don't need to see a letter. I'm the crew. That's a blanket. All blankets, pillows, and large coats have to be stowed. FAA regulation. Now put it up, or I'll put it up for you." His tone was not just firm, it was hostile. This was not a request, it was a command, and it carried the clear implication that they were, once again, wrong. David leaned across the aisle. "Sir," he said, his voice polite but firm, "my wife is correct. We went through the proper channels for this. It is an approved medical device under the Air Carrier Access Act. Your own airline sent us this authorization." He held out the letter. Chad didn't take it. He scoffed, a small, arrogant sound. "The what act? Sir, I'm not going to argue with you. I'm responsible for the safety of this cabin. That thing is a safety hazard. It blocks egress in an emergency. It's not approved. End of story." Maya in 2A was watching this. Her blood, which had just cooled down, began to boil. She saw Chad smirk. She saw him deliberately look away from the letter her father was holding. This wasn't about a blanket. This was about power. "He's lying, Dad," Maya said, her voice clear. "The ACAA is real. He's just being lazy." Chad's head whipped around to Maya. "Young lady, you will show respect to the crew. One more word out of you, and I'll have the captain speak to you." He then turned back to Alani. "Ma'am, I am telling you for the last time. Stow the blanket. Now." Leo, hearing the raised voices, started to whimper. He pulled the blanket up to his chin. "No," he whispered. "Mine. Need it." This was the critical moment. Chad saw the boy's defiance, and it enraged him. He saw a family who had, in his mind, beaten his friend Susan at the gate, and now they were defying him. He was going to win. "Fine," Chad said, his voice hardening. "If you won't do it." He took a step into Leo's pod and reached for the blanket. It was a violation. He leaned over the child and grabbed a fistful of the expensive therapeutic fabric. "No!" Leo shrieked, a piercing, terrified sound that echoed through the entire front cabin. He grabbed the blanket back, a desperate tug of war. "Get off him!" Alani screamed, lunging from her seat, her seatbelt unclicked. David was up a fraction of a second later, his 6.2 frame filling the aisle. He didn't touch Chad. He didn't need to. His voice was a weapon. "Do not touch my son." The cabin, which had been full of the clinking of pre-departure champagne glasses, went dead silent. Every passenger in business class was staring. Chad froze, his hand still on the blanket. His face was pale, but his eyes were blazing with fury. He had been challenged. "Sir," Chad spat, "you are interfering with a crew member. That is a federal offense. You are being aggressive. You just put your hands on me." "I didn't touch you," David boomed. "You assaulted my child. You tried to rip a medical device off him. You are in violation of federal law." "He's lying," Chad shouted, now appealing to the other passengers. "This man is unhinged. He's threatening me. They're refusing to follow safety instructions." It was happening again. The script was the same. They were belligerent. They were aggressive. They were the problem. But Chad had made a fatal miscalculation. He had underestimated Maya. The moment Chad had reached for the blanket, Maya's phone was up. And this time it wasn't hidden. It was held high, her hand shaking, but her aim steady. The flash was on, illuminating Chad's face, contorted in anger, his hand still gripping the grey fabric clutched by a crying, terrified child. "He's assaulting my brother!" Maya's voice was sharp and clear, cutting through the chaos. "This is Chad, a flight attendant on transatlantic Flight 88. He's ignoring his medical documentation. He's trying to assault my brother." Chad's head snapped toward the light. He flinched, as if struck. The camera. It was on him. "Turn that off," he shrieked. "Filming the crew is illegal." "It is not," Maya shot back. "We are in a public space. You are assaulting a minor. Everyone, look at what he's doing." Then, a second voice. A woman from 3A, a white woman with short blonde hair, held up her own phone. "I'm recording too. I saw the whole thing. You reached for that boy's blanket. He's just a child. You're disgusting." Chad was trapped. The light from two phones pinned him like an insect. He let go of the blanket, as if it were on fire. He stumbled back into the aisle, his face a mask of pure panic. I was just—" he stammered. At that exact moment, drawn by the shouting, Susan Jenkins stormed onto the plane. She had seen the Wilsons get on, and she had been stewing, waiting for Chad to report back. The problem was supposed to be handled. "What is the problem now?" she demanded, marching down the aisle. She saw the Wilsons standing. She saw Chad, pale and shaking, and she saw the phones. Oh, she saw the phones. Susan Jenkins' brain worked at lightning speed, processing the scene. She saw the Wilsons, whom she had already marked as trouble, standing in the aisle. She saw her colleague, Chad, looking like he'd seen a ghost. And she saw at least two phones, one held by the smart-mouthed daughter and another by a passenger, all pointing directly at her. This was a PR nightmare. Her customer service training, buried deep beneath layers of cynicism, kicked in. But it was the wrong training. It was the training of de-escalate by placating, not de-escalate by admitting fault. "All right, everyone, let's just calm down," Susan said, projecting her voice across the cabin. She gave the Wilsons a look of profound disappointment, as if they had created this mess. "What seems to be the issue here? This flight is already delayed." "The issue," Alani said, her voice shaking with rage, her arm wrapped around a sobbing Leo, "is that your employee, Chad, just assaulted our son." "Assaulted?" Susan scoffed, though the cameras made her keep a strained smile. "Ma'am, that's a very serious allegation. I'm sure Chad was just trying to enforce safety protocols." "He was," Chad chimed in, finding his voice. He pointed a shaking finger at David. "They're belligerent. They refused to stow their items, and when I tried to help, he threatened me." "He's lying," Maya yelled, her phone rock steady. "We have it all on video. You reached for him, Chad. You scared him." "Ma'am," David said, addressing Susan directly, ignoring Chad. "We presented your crew member with this." He held up the letter from Transatlantic's Disability Services. "This is a medical authorization, signed by a Dr. Henderson from your own corporate compliance office. It explicitly states this blanket is an approved medical device under the Air Carrier Access Act. Your employee refused to read it and then tried to forcibly remove it from our child. Susan's and Chad's faces changed. It was subtle, but it was there. The Air Carrier Access Act. Those were the magic words. Those were the words from the mandatory annual training module they all clicked through. Those were the words that came with massive federal fines. Susan's smarmy smile faltered. She knew she was being filmed. She knew they had documentation. This had moved beyond a simple argument. "Well," she stammered, "I'm sure we can look at the letter, but there's no need for this hostility." She turned to the passenger in 3A. "Ma'am, please stop filming. It's against company policy." The passenger, Sarah, laughed. "It's really not. And I'm not stopping. This is evidence. You people are bullies." Susan was trapped. Chad was trapped. They looked at each other, a flicker of pure panic in their eyes. They had cornered a family they thought was powerless, only to find themselves cornered instead. And that's when David Wilson delivered the twist. He had been silent for the last 30 seconds, watching this unfold. He looked at Susan, at Chad, at the staring passengers, and at his crying son. The anger in him was a cold, dense star. He was a surgeon. He valued precision. It was time to make the cut. He pulled his own phone from his pocket. He wasn't recording. He unlocked the screen, went to his contacts, and pressed a name. He put the phone to his ear. Susan watched him, confused. "Sir, making calls isn't... We're preparing for departure." David held up one finger, silencing her. The other end picked up. "Robert." "Hello," David said, his voice perfectly calm, as if he were ordering coffee. "David Wilson here. I'm sorry to call you on your cell. Yes, the conference. That's right." Susan and Chad exchanged a look. "Robert." "Listen, Robert, I'm on one of your planes, Flight 88 out of LAX, and we have a significant problem." A dawning, sickening horror began to creep onto Susan Jenkins's face. "Yes," David continued, "we were just racially profiled and denied boarding by your gate supervisor, a Susan Jenkins. She accused us of fraud and tried to separate our son from us. Oh, it gets worse." Chad Peterson's face was now the color of skim milk. "Once we got on the plane," David said, his eyes locking with Chad's, "your flight attendant, a Chad Peterson, refused to honor our son's ACAA medical documentation. He then attempted to physically rip his medical blanket off of him, terrifying him. Yes, assault, that's the word. And the whole thing, starting with Miss Jenkins at the gate, is on video. From several angles." David paused, listening. The entire cabin was so quiet they could hear the faint, tinny squawk of the voice on the other end of the phone. Who are you calling?" Susan whispered, the blood draining from her face. David looked at her, his eyes void of all sympathy. "I'm calling Robert Miller, the CEO of Transatlantic Airways. He and I sit on the St. Jude's charity board together. I was just at his house for dinner last month." The bottom fell out of their world. This wasn't just some random family they could push around. This wasn't some scammer trying to get an upgrade. This was a personal friend of the CEO, a surgeon, a VIP who had been, for the last 30 minutes, treated like garbage. Susan Jenkins looked like she was going to be physically sick. Chad Peterson looked like he was about to faint. "Mr. Wilson," Susan shrieked, her voice a desperate, cracking plea. "Mr. Wilson, sir, I promise it was a misunderstanding. The system, the computer, it was just a mistake. I didn't know." "You didn't know what?" Alani said, her voice like ice. that we were people, or that we were friends with your boss." David held up his hand again. "Yes, Robert. They're both here. Yes, I'll hold." He looked at the two employees who were frozen in a tableau of pure terror. "He's conferring with legal, and he wants to speak to the captain." "The captain?" Susan squeaked. "I'll get him," Chad said, bolting from the scene, practically running toward the cockpit, desperate to escape. "No," David said. "You stay right here, Mr. Peterson. The COO wants you both here." Chad stopped, trapped. The door to the cockpit opened. Captain Armstrong, an older man with silver hair and a chest full of ribbons, stepped out. He had the exasperated look of a man whose pre-flight checks had been interrupted. "What in the Sam Hill is going on out here?" he boomed. "We are 20 minutes past our pushback time. This cabin is a mess." David Wilson, still on the phone with the CEO, simply said, "Captain Armstrong, Robert Miller, your CEO, is on the line for you. He'd like to discuss the actions of your gate supervisor, Ms. Jenkins, and your flight attendant, Mr. Peterson." He held out his iPhone. Captain Armstrong looked at the phone. He looked at the two ashen-faced employees. He looked at the crying child. And he looked at the two other phones, still recording every second. With a grim, thunderous expression, he took the phone from David Wilson. "This is Captain Armstrong," he barked into the phone. "Yes, sir. I'm listening. I see. Yes, sir. I understand completely. It will be handled. Immediately." He hung up and handed the phone back to David. He did not look at the Wilsons. He looked at Susan and Chad. His face was pure, unadulterated fury. "You two," he said, his voice low and shaking with rage. "You delayed my flight, you violated federal law, and you harassed a VIP passenger, a friend of the CEO, and his family." "Captain," Susan begged. "It was a mistake. The computer—" "Shut up," Armstrong commanded. "I don't care about your computer. I care about the law. I care about my passengers. You," he pointed at Susan, "are a gate agent. You don't belong on my aircraft. Get off. Now." "Captain," Chad stammered. "I was just following." "And you," the captain roared, "are a disgrace to this uniform. You tried to take a medical item from a child. Are you insane? Get off my plane, both of you. Your IDs are suspended. You will be met at the gate. Get out. Now." There was no appeal. There was no argument. In the world of aviation, the captain's word is law. Humiliated, silent, and shaking, Susan Jenkins and Chad Peterson turned. They walked past Maya, who kept her phone high, recording their entire walk of shame. They walked past the other passengers, who stared with open-mouthed contempt. They stepped off the jet bridge, their careers over in the span of a 3-minute phone call. The cabin was silent. Captain Armstrong turned to the Wilsons. His face softened instantly. "Mr. Wilson, Dr. Wilson, on behalf of the airline, the real airline, not that, I offer my deepest apologies. Please sit. We will get you comfortable." He then turned to the cabin, his captain voice returning. "Folks, this is Captain Armstrong. We apologize for the disturbance. We had to remove 2 unqualified employees. We will be underway as soon as possible." A small spattering of applause broke out. The woman in 3A, Sarah, finally lowered her phone. She gave Maya a thumbs up. David and Alani sat down, their bodies trembling. Leo, his blanket now safely draped over him, had his head in Alani's lap. "It's over," David whispered, rubbing his face. "Upload that video to your cloud, Maya," Alani said, her voice tight. "Upload it right now." "Already doing it, Mom," Maya replied, her eyes still on the empty jet bridge door. The 10-hour flight to London was, by any measure, perfect. The moment Captain Armstrong returned to the cockpit, the head purser, a kind, efficient woman named Margaret, descended on the Wilson family with the kind of service reserved for royalty. "Dr. Wilson, Mr. Wilson," she said, crouching in the aisle, her voice a low, sincere murmur. "I am mortified. I was in the back galley and didn't hear the commotion until it was over. Captain Armstrong has radioed ahead. He's informed me of what happened." She looked at Leo, who was finally dozing. "Can I get your son anything? A hot chocolate? An ice cream sundae? For you, a glass of champagne? Dom Perignon, on the house." "We're fine, thank you, Margaret," Alani said, managing a weak smile. "Just peace. That's all we want." "You will have it," Margaret promised. For the rest of the flight, she and her crew treated the Wilsons with flawless, respectful service, and conspicuously left Leo and his blanket entirely alone. But while the Wilsons flew east, a corporate firestorm was raging back in Los Angeles and at Transatlantic's headquarters in New York. Robert Miller, the CEO, was not a man who tolerated incompetence, and he hated lawsuits. A personal friend being abused was one thing. A personal friend being abused while documenting violations of the Air Carrier Access Act was a 5-alarm fire. When Susan Jenkins and Chad Peterson stepped off the jet bridge, they weren't met by a manager. They were met by Maria Flores, the LAX station director, the highest-ranking transatlantic employee at the airport, and 2 armed airport security guards. "Ms. Jenkins, Mr. Peterson, my office." "Now," Maria said. Her face was granite. The walk through the terminal was humiliating. Passengers from their own cancelled flight list stared. Other airline employees whispered. They were dead men walking. Maria's office was a glass box overlooking the tarmac. On the large conference screen, 3 faces were already waiting. Robert Miller, CEO, the head of the legal department, Mark Thompson, and the vice president of human resources. "Sit," Maria commanded. Susan and Chad sat, their hands folded, trembling. "Do you know who that family was?" Robert Miller's voice boomed from the speaker, distorted and furious. "That was Dr. David Wilson. He is one of the top 10 cardiovascular surgeons in the United States. He is a keynote speaker. He is also a personal friend. And you, Ms. Jenkins, decided he was trying to scam his way into business class." "Mr. Miller, sir," Susan began, her voice cracking. The system, it's just, we see so much fraud. And they looked what, Susan?" The HR VP cut in, her voice sharp. "Finish that sentence. They looked like what?" Susan went silent. She knew she couldn't say it. She couldn't say, "They looked like they didn't belong." "That's what I thought," the HR VP said. "We've had reports about you, Susan, about your attitude at gate 1 to 12, about passengers of color being randomly selected for extra screening far too often. We were building a file. Today, you just signed, sealed, and delivered it." "And you, Mr. Peterson," Mark Thompson, the lawyer, spoke up. "You are certified on the ACAA. You know what a medical authorization letter means. You not only ignored it, you escalated the situation by touching a passenger, a minor. Do you have any idea the liability you just exposed this company to?" "He was belligerent," Chad pleaded, his last desperate defense. "The father. He got in my face. He threatened me." "That's a lie," Maria Flores said. She clicked her mouse. A video file opened on the screen. It was the footage from the woman in 3A, Sarah. She had apparently emailed it directly to the airline's corporate complaints address, with the subject line, "Violation of federal law, Flight 88. They watched in horrified silence. The video was crystal clear. It showed Alani calmly trying to explain. It showed David holding up the letter. It showed Chad, his face twisted in a sneer, saying, "I don't care what your letter says." And it showed, with undeniable clarity, Chad reaching over and grabbing the blanket from a crying Leo. It then showed David standing up, his hands clearly at his sides, his voice loud but not threatening. "Do not touch my son." The video ended. Chad Peterson had nothing to say. He was staring at the floor, his entire body shaking. "The Wilsons' own video, which I've also seen," the lawyer added, "is even worse. It includes the entire incident at the gate, Ms. Jenkins, including you accusing them of fraud, calling security, and then your miraculous discovery of their lost tickets the moment the police sided with them. It is perhaps the most damning piece of evidence of discriminatory denial of service I have ever seen." Susan Jenkins burst into tears, loud, racking sobs. "Please, please, I have been here for 15 years. It was a mistake. One mistake." "This wasn't a mistake, Susan," Robert Miller's voice said, cold as ice. "It was a choice. You chose to see a black family as a threat. You chose to escalate. You chose to lie. Mr. Peterson, you chose to bully a child with a disability. These are not mistakes. These are character flaws, and they have no place at my airline." The HR VP spoke. "Susan Jenkins, Chad Peterson. Your employment with Transatlantic Airways is terminated, effective immediately. You will be paid for today, and that is all. Your medical benefits cease at midnight. You will be escorted from the property. If you ever set foot in a transatlantic terminal again, you will be arrested for trespassing. Do you understand?" Chad nodded, dumbly. Susan was hyperventilating, unable to speak. "Get them out of my sight, Maria," the CEO ordered. The screen went black. Maria Flores stood up and opened her office door. The two security guards, who had been waiting outside, stepped in. "Please gather your personal effects from your lockers. You will be escorted out." Susan, in a daze, was helped to her feet. Chad walked like a zombie. As they were led through the staff areas, the whispers followed them. Their careers, built over decades, were gone. They weren't just fired. They were exiled. When the Wilsons landed at Heathrow, the drama was, for them, already over. They were exhausted, but relieved. As they stepped onto the jet bridge, a man in a pristine suit was waiting, holding a small sign. "Wilson." "Mr. and Dr. Wilson," he said, with a crisp British accent. "My name is Arthur Davies. I'm the UK station manager for Transatlantic. On behalf of Mr. Miller, please accept our deepest apologies. A car is waiting to take you to your hotel. Your luggage is being expedited and will be in the car before you are. Please come with me." He led them through the diplomatic channel, bypassing the massive customs line. In less than 10 minutes, they were in the back of a black Mercedes S-Class, gliding silently toward central London. "Well," David said, looking at Alani, "that's comprehensive." "It's what's right," Alani said. "But it's not enough. It's not just about us." "I know," David said. He looked at Maya. "But what do we do with that video?" Maya looked at the file on her phone. "I don't know, Dad. But Sarah, the woman in 3A, she gave me her card as we were leaving. She's a journalist." A new, different kind of storm was about to break. Sarah Donahue was not just any journalist. She was a senior investigative producer for Viewpoint, one of the largest online news organizations, known for its explosive, high-impact video exposés. She had given Maya her card with a simple, "If you want to talk, call me. What happened to you was wrong, and it happens every day." For 2 days the Wilsons debated. David's conference was a resounding success. His speech on non-invasive surgical techniques was met with a standing ovation. Alani's presentation on cultural artifacts and repatriation was brilliant. They were feted, celebrated, and treated with the respect their accomplishments demanded. It was a jarring contrast to the humiliation they'd endured at LAX. On the third night, in their suite at the Savoy, Alani was reading emails. A group of black academics had written to her about a traveling while black database, sharing stories of being bumped from flights, accused of theft, and harassed by crew. "David," she said, her voice heavy. "Robert Miller fired Susan and Chad. That's justice for us. But what about everyone else? What about the people who don't have the CEO's cell number? The people who get intimidated, get off the flight, and just lose their money and their dignity?" David knew she was right. He was going to touch Leo, David said, the memory still making his hands clench. If Maya hadn't filmed, "Call Sarah," Alani said. "Give her the footage, all of it. The 17-minute audio from the gate and the video from the plane. This isn't revenge, David. It's a deterrent." Maya, who had been listening, simply nodded. "I'm on it." She emailed Sarah Donahue. "We're ready to talk." 2 days later, the story dropped. Viewpoint had edited it brilliantly. They started with the walk of shame, Susan and Chad being forced off the plane, then rewound. It opened with the clear 17-minute audio file Maya had recorded. "Susan, audio. I don't know what to tell you. The system says no." "David, audio. Mom, I have the receipt. My credit card was charged 24,870 nast. Susan, audio. I don't care what your email says. I care what my system says. Either take the economy seats or you won't be flying at all." The story then cut to the clear favoritism, the audio capturing Susan's sugary sweet voice for the White family. "Oh, the system is so fussy. Let me fix that for you, Mr. Miller." Then, the climax. Viewpoint used both Maya's and Sarah's videos, splicing them together. They showed Chad's sneer, his hand reaching, Leo's shriek, David's protective roar, and Alani's desperate, "He's assaulting our son." They overlaid it with a graphic of the Air Carrier Access Act, highlighting the exact passages Chad and Susan had violated. The headline was devastating. "Airline staff argue with black family over seats, then attempt to rip medical blanket from anxious child. They regret it the moment cameras roll." Within an hour, it had 1 million views. By the end of the day, 50 million. It was the #1 story on the planet. The names Susan Jenkins and Chad Peterson were not redacted. Viewpoint's legal team, armed with the Wilsons' testimony and the undeniable proof, were confident. The hard karma was not just swift, it was brutal and digital. Susan Jenkins, who had been crying to her friends about being wrongfully terminated, woke up to find her face plastered on every major news site. She was Gate Susan, a new archetype in the pantomultiverse of viral racists. Her LinkedIn profile was inundated with thousands of furious messages. Former colleagues, long silenced by her managerial position, began leaking their own stories of her bigotry to journalists. She was seen on a local LA news report, running from a cameraman, hiding her face as she got into her car. Within 3 months, unable to find any job and evicted from her apartment, she moved back in with her elderly mother in Bakersfield, her public life in ruins. Chad Peterson's fate was, if possible, worse. The viral story was seen by other flight attendants. A private FA Facebook group lit up. Dozens of other crew members came forward with stories. Chad, it turned out, had a long, documented history of being abrasive, particularly with non-white passengers and families with demanding children. He had multiple complaints in his file that had been ignored. The Flight Attendants Union, seeing the undeniable video evidence, publicly disavowed him. He was effectively blacklisted from every major airline in North America and Europe. His dream of traveling the world was over. He was last seen working at a rental car kiosk at the Phoenix airport, his face thinner, his eyes dull, a man haunted by his own infamy. Transatlantic Airways was forced into a massive public apology. Robert Miller, the CIO, went on national television. He didn't make excuses. He called it what it was: a disgusting failure of character and a clear case of racial bias, compounded by an ignorant violation of federal disability law. He announced a company-wide, mandatory retraining program designed in partnership with Dr. Alani Wilson. The airline, in addition to a private settlement with the Wilsons, all of which was donated to the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, and the ARC, a disability rights organization, made a $10 million donation to the St. Jude's Children's Hospital Fund that David sat on the board of. The Wilsons never wanted fame. They were private people. But their story had become a flashpoint. They handled it with the same grace they had shown at the gate. Alani appeared on several news programs, not to condemn the two employees, but to discuss the systemic nature of implicit bias. This wasn't about two bad people, she explained. It was about a system that empowered them, a system that teaches employees to see customers as threats, and that sees black families as less than by default. The cameras, they're just a tool to level the playing field. They force people to see the truth they would rather ignore. A week later, the Wilsons were back at Heathrow, preparing to fly home. Their trip had been a strange, surreal mix of professional triumph and personal trauma. When they arrived at the transatlantic check-in, the station manager, Arthur Davies, was there to greet them personally. "Dr. Wilson, Mr. Wilson, Miss Wilson, Master Leo, we have you all set." They were not in business class. The airline had, without asking, upgraded them to first class in the private 1A, 1B, 1D, and 1E pods at the very front of the 747. Their bags were tagged with CEO priority. As they boarded, the new crew, who had all seen the video, treated them with a profound, almost reverent respect. The head purser came over before the doors even closed. "Dr. Wilson," she said to Alani, "I just want you to know, we have all been briefed. Whatever Master Leo needs, he gets. If he wants to walk around, if he needs his blanket, whatever it is, you just let us know." Alani looked at the purser, at her kind, genuine eyes, and nodded. "Thank you. That means a lot." The flight was smooth. The hard karma had already been delivered. Susan and Chad were gone, their lives altered forever by a few minutes of recorded hate. The twist of David's phone call had already unspooled, but the real story, the one that mattered, was happening in seat 1B. Leo was not wearing his headphones. The first-class cabin was so quiet, he didn't need them. He had his blanket draped over his lap, and he was watching the curvature of the earth from his window, fascinated. Halfway through the flight, he unbuckled, walked over to his father's pod, and tapped him on the shoulder. David took off his glasses. "What's up, champ?" Leo didn't say anything. He just leaned in and gave his father a long, tight hug. Then he did the same to Alani. Then he went to Maya, who was watching a movie. He tapped her. She pulled off her headphones. "Hey, Leobug, you okay?" Leo looked at his sister, his 16-year-old protector. He looked at the phone sitting on her tray table. "You were brave," Leo said, his voice clear. "You made the monsters go away." Maya felt her throat tighten. She pulled him into a one-armed hug. "You were brave too, Leo. We protect each other. That's the Wilson way." He nodded, satisfied, and went back to his window. David and Alani watched the exchange, holding hands across the center console. The viral storm, the firings, the public apologies. None of it mattered as much as that. They had faced the ugliness, the raw, casual racism that tried to deny their existence, and they had faced it as a family. They had protected their son. Maya went back to her phone, but she wasn't watching the movie. She was reading the comments on Sarah's viewpoint video. There were hundreds of thousands of them. This happened to my mother in Dallas. A gate agent called security on my husband for asking for a wheelchair. Thank you, Wilsons, for not backing down. I'm a flight attendant, and I'm sharing this with my entire base. This has to stop. Maya smiled. It wasn't just their story anymore. It was everyone's. She saved the video file one more time, under a new name. The Wilson Way. They were flying home, not just as a family, but as a symbol. And in the quiet hum of the 747, 35,000 feet above the world, that felt like the most profound victory of all. The story of the Wilson family is a shocking, real-life example of what happens when bias and power go unchecked. But more importantly, it's a story of courage. The courage of a family to stand firm, the courage of a daughter to hit record, and the courage of a bystander to lend her voice. Susan Jenkins and Chad Peterson learned that day that their actions have consequences. They chose to profile a family, not knowing they were messing with the wrong people, and it was all caught on camera. What do you think? Was this karma served, or was the public fallout too much? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We've all seen or experienced injustice while traveling. Share your story. And if you want more true stories of karma and justice served, don't forget to like this video, share it with your friends, and hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss a story. Thank you for listening.